Mr. Speaker, sir, may I first join the Leader of the Opposition in congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Eastbourne, in the way in which he moved the loyal address. He did it in his own inimitable style, dry as always, for which I am eternally grateful, and with his own particular way of showing that even the opposition have benefited very much from periods of Conservative prosperity. I know when we were in opposition, which I'm sure we will never be again, he was in fact the scourge of the then Labour government. He moved private bill after private bill, a bill to sell council houses, a bill to privatise bus companies, a bill to privatise the National Freight Corporation, a bill to privatise cable and wireless, and a bill to privatise the British Steel Corporation. Of course, privatisation got nowhere with the Labour government. They are socialists. They want clause 4, nationalisation of the means of production and distribution and exchange. But I'm happy to say that all of those things were achieved under my administration. May I also congratulate my honourable friend for Bury South, who seconded the motion. He is well known for having won his seat and retained it against all the odds, and he will do so again. The way in which he has truly looked after his constituents, looking always after them both as a constituency member and their rights in this House, will secure him another return. And I was very glad that he pointed out that we learned during the lifetime of the Labour government that inflation is the father and mother of unemployment, and that during the lifetime of this government his constituents have profited enormously from more jobs for them to choose from. It is... Yes, may I just finish thanking my two honourable friends, and then I will give way to the honourable gentleman. It is, of course, a matter of a very happy coincidence that in a year when the gracious speech contains important proposals for legal reform, that both the proposer and seconder are distinguished solicitors. As a barrister myself, I welcome this early start to giving them rights of audience. Both my honourable friends are to be warmly congratulated. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Tom DL.
Tell the House in what respects the account given by the former Chancellor of the Exchequer of his departure was inaccurate.
May I assure the honourable gentleman that I shall come on to dealing with the economy in just one moment, if he will give me time. In the meantime, I'd like to deal with some of the things which the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, said, which I hadn't proposed to put in my speech, and I'd better deal with them now. The National Health Service. He omitted to point out that for every £1 Labour spent on the National Health Service, this government has spent 3. He omitted to point out that, yes, we did achieve economic growth at a faster rate than our European competitors, and that resulted in employment, a record number of people in jobs in this country under Conservative government, a record number for all time. He talked about traffic congestion. He omitted to point out that under a Labour government, they actually had to cut the amount spent on motorways and trunk roads. Of course they did. They ran the economy so badly. He then came on to pensions. He omitted to say that the way in which pensions are managed and the pension rights in the European community are very different from here. Moreover, he omitted to point out that it was a Labour government who was not able to honour a pledge to protect pensions against rising prices, when the rising prices would have required a 20% increase, and they just hadn't the money to do it. When he spoke about teachers, he omitted to say that there's a higher proportion of teachers in proportion to pupils than ever before in our history. There's also a bigger number of students in higher education. He spoke about war widows. He omitted to point out that it was this government that freed the war widows' pension from tax altogether. And he omitted to point out that the age allowances which we have increased, and that the actual rates of age allowances for war widows will go up very much more than inflation next April. Indeed, for those aged 65 to 69, the age allowances will go up by 14%, and for those aged 80 and over by some 30%. He actually tried to say that what they had in the Soviet Union was not socialism. Of course it was. Of course it was. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. Massive nationalization. And if he looks back at his speeches in opposition, he wanted more and more nationalization. Massively high taxation, which again is a way of taking people's rightful earnings away from them, and massive detailed controls, such detailed controls that at the end of the last period of Labour government, manufacturing output was lower than it was at the beginning. He omits to say that. You'd think from what they said that manufacturing output went up during the period of government. It didn't. It was lower at the end than it was at the beginning. He says that we're being dragged along behind the EEC. May I point out that far from being dragged along behind, we are in fact ahead in the way in which we are implementing, for example, in the way in which we're implementing the directives for the single market. By now, some 68 single market directives should have been implemented by the end of June. France had yet to implement 9, Denmark and the Netherlands 12, all others more than 12, with Italy at 33. We made the United Kingdom call. We have the record with only 3 measures being unimplemented. We, in fact, as in so many other things, lead the field in Europe. He tried to suggest that competition policy wasn't an essential part of having a single market. Of course you cannot have varying subsidies if you're to have fair terms with which to compete with other people. If you permit subsidies, the richest country will have the biggest subsidies, and there will be no common market, no single market, and therefore nothing extra for us to enjoy. He then pointed out that there were times when Britain was isolated in her arguments. Yes, we were isolated in the European community when we tried to get a fair deal for Britain for the budget. And we stayed isolated. And we stayed isolated until we succeeded and got the fair deal which eluded the Labour government. Yes, we were isolated when we tried to reform the common agricultural policy, and eventually we got the reform of the common agricultural policy. Yes, we were isolated when they wanted a common withholding tax, and we went on and with our arguments, and eventually we won. What he calls isolation is really leadership and winning your argument. Mr. Speaker, this new parliamentary session will witness the start of a new decade. The 1970s were a decade when Britain was in decline, when socialism meant that we had to be treated like some third world country and rescued by the IMF. The 1980s have been the decade when Britain regained her strength and pride. We're no longer afraid of change, but can respond to it with confidence. British industry has, one moment when I finish this particular paragraph. British industry has been set free to adapt to new ways and new technology at an unparalleled rate. Businesses can once again get a good return on investment. That's why over the latest 3 years we're seeing a 40% increase in business investment, an unprecedented advance. And that's why industries like steel, newspapers and now the docks, whose equipment and working methods were barely adequate for the 1950s, have now been transformed to compete with the best in the 1990s. And that's why this country has been getting the lion's share of overseas investment coming into the European community. They prefer to come to Britain. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Clive Stirling.
The Prime Minister talks about pride in our country.